The directional terms are used when we are referencing the location of a particular structure either in or on the body and comparing the location of that structure to other structures that are located within or on the body. We see that these terms are standardized across many different professional fields to allow us to clearly and effectively communicate. We'll begin with anterior and posterior. The term anterior describes the front of the body or towards the front of the body. We can also use the term ventral in place of anterior as they are referring to the same directional term. So for example, we would describe the nose as being located on the anterior side of the body, but you could also say that the nose is on the ventral side of the body. And posterior and dorsal are essentially the opposite of anterior or ventral. Posterior describes the back of the body or towards the back of the body. So we would say that the gluteal muscles are located on the posterior side of the body. We could also say that the gluteal muscles are located on the dorsal side of the body. Next, we'll examine superior and inferior. Superior means above or towards the upper parts of the body. A couple of examples here are that the head is superior to the neck or located superior to the neck. The larynx, which is a cartilage structure within the throat, is located superior to the heart. And the term inferior means the opposite of the term superior. So inferior means below or towards the lower parts of the body. In this example here, we would say that the abdomen is inferior to the neck and the heart is inferior to the larynx. So in these diagrams here, we see the terms superior position towards the upper part of the body, the term inferior position toward the lower part of the body, the term anterior or ventral referring to the front of the body, and the term posterior or dorsal referring to the back of the body. Next, we'll examine medial and lateral. The term medial means toward the midline of the body. So for example, the trachea is a structure that's located medial to the shoulders, and lateral means away from the midline of the body. And in this particular example, we would say that the lungs are lateral to the heart, because we have got the heart essentially located medially along the midline, and then on the right and left lateral sides of the heart, we see the lungs. Next, we'll examine proximal and distal. Proximal and distal are terms that are used to refer to structures located on limbs, that is on the upper limb or the lower limb, and comparing the position of that structure to another structure on the limb. So the term proximal implies that a structure is close to the shoulder joint if that structure is located on the upper limb, and proximal is also used to refer to a structure on the lower limb that is close to the hip joint. So for example, we would say that the elbow is proximal to the wrist because the elbow is closer to the shoulder joint than the wrist is to the shoulder joint. The opposite of that would be distal. Distal is a term that means far from the shoulder joint if that particular structure is located on the upper limb, or far from the hip joint if that structure is located on the lower limb. So in this example, we would say that the ankle is distal to the knee because the ankle is furthest from the hip joint than the knee is from the hip joint, or further from the hip joint than the knee is. And finally, we have the terms superficial and deep, and these are referring to structures that are located externally or internally. So the term superficial means close to or at the external surface of the body. So in this example, we would say that the skin is superficial to the skeletal muscles, and the term deep is the opposite of superficial. It means that a structure is located far from the external surface or is more internalized. So in this example, we would say that the bones are located deep to the skin. So referring back to that diagram, we see medial, which is towards the midline of the body. Lateral is away from the midline of the body. We see the terms proximal and distal being applied to both the upper limb and the lower limb, with the term proximal in the upper limb being close to the shoulder joint, the term distal in the upper limb being furthest from the shoulder joint, the term proximal in the lower limb referring to close to the hip joint, and distal in the lower limb being furthest from the hip joint. And finally, we'll examine the planes of sectioning. So images of the body using imaging technologies such as MRI, CT scans, X-rays, that kind of thing, they often are images that are produced when the computer or the X-ray takes an internal image of the body in one or more what we call planes of sectioning. And a plane of sectioning is an imaginary flat surface that divides the body or the organ that we're examining into different pieces. So for example, we have sagittal planes, which are imaginary planes that divide a body or a structure vertically into a right and a left portion. Now, if that sagittal plane happens to be directly along the midline of the body, we would call that a mid-sagittal plane. And because mid-sagittal planes divide a body or structure vertically into an equal right and left half. We also have frontal or coronal planes, which are imaginary planes or surfaces that divide the body or structure vertically into an anterior and a posterior portion. And finally, we have transverse or cross-sectional planes, which divide a body or a structure horizontally into a superior and inferior portion. So in this figure here, figure 1.14, shows all three of the typical sectioning planes: the sagittal plane, the frontal or coronal plane, and the transverse or the cross-sectional plane.